thank you all for agreeing to do this. Estuary to me has always been a very people-first movement where we want to keep people's stories and what they went through grounded. The microphones don't work, sorry. This is just, no, it's okay. We're having some technical difficulties. So if you guys want to move in closer, we're going to try to speak as loud as we can. But this mic is really just to see if we can record some audio, maybe salvage something together, because I know I'm going to get some angry emails about why aren't the talks out to the content monsters.
Yeah, if you can't hear, come to the front.
Yeah, so so we just try to keep people's stories front and center, to keep it grounded and help keep that humanity. So I wanted to start this by being able to have a chance to share people's stories and kind of figure out, just who you guys are and what your journeys were. So to start, why don't you just give me a 2-minute introduction, each of you, of who you are now, and then we'll spend the next hour going back and trying to figure out how you got to where you are. So Zahira, do you want to start?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Actually for me, not for you guys, but for me, it's actually a blessing the recording has failed because I wasn't sure if I was going to do this panel until about 2 minutes ago. And that's because my background is that I grew up in a very religious family, and then I apostatized from that family, and I apostatized from Islam. So there is some risk here. And then I had a long and very happy kind of period for like 10 years where I don't think I ever was like a committed atheist or materialist, but I just sort of thought that functionally that's what my life was. I've always had this sense of what I call like existential dysphoria, like I never even wanted to be alive or thought I should be alive, and I kind of had quite a nihilistic view of the world. Not that I wanted to, that was just my experience of the world. In my professional life, I'm a human rights lawyer. By background, I do other kinds of law, so I see a lot of the worst things that people do to each other, and I could never reconcile that with a world in which there is a personal God. I don't mean a God in the sense of like a first mover, but I mean a God who cares about people and humanity. So I had the experience of living in an indifferent world. And then completely unexpectedly, a couple of years ago, I don't really know how to describe it, so maybe we'll get to it not in the introduction, but I had a very strange religious experience in a church, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. So I blame that very beautiful building for where I am now, which is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And since I came back from there, it's not that I just had an experience there. Since I came back, I felt like the world has come alive. Like I used to walk past churches and it feels like now they're glowing to me. I noticed the trees more and the colors more. And really I'm just trying to figure out what on earth that all means. And we'll talk more about that later, so thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I share your sentiment. I'm a little bit excited that this isn't being recorded because in the age of YouTube, constantly the thing in my brain is like, oh man, if I say it this way, it could be clipped and taken out of context. So you guys get the unfiltered me this morning. So congratulations. My name is Jared. I'm an atheist. I am a former street preacher, a former chaplain, a former worship leader, and I've got a degree and a half in theology, something like that. I have a series called Atheist Church Audit, where I hopscotch around to different churches, cathedrals, temples, cults, wards, and I explore it as a non-believer, an outsider, just trying to gain a little bit of perspective. I kind of identify as, I don't really like the term non-resistant non-believer, but something along those lines. I don't have any desire to tear people's faith down. I want to see where we can meet in the middle, and I want to, since this isn't being recorded, I want to antagonize Christians into being the best they can be.
Yeah. My name's Nemo. I am, if we want to talk about niche for a moment, I am a commentator on the Mormon Church. So take a subset of a subset of people that want to listen to something, and that's what I do. I grew up, I'm a third-generation member of the Mormon Church. I was excommunicated 2 years ago for having a big mouth about the Mormon Church. And having not learnt my lesson, I'm now here today to talk to you about that journey and about Mormonism, probably in some way or form.
Thank you so much. So I was raised, this will make a lot more sense, I think, to the Brits in the room, but I was like culturally Christian. Background Christianity, I think of it as like Radio 4 turned down low, just like burbling away in the background, but not at all formative in my childhood home. My mum was, I think, nothing, and had not thought about it sufficiently to call herself an atheist or even an agnostic, but church was for posh people, essentially. There was a real anti-elitism instinct in her working class clan, and understandably, for her family still, it's just not something that they think is for them. It's for posh people. And my dad was, I think, very quietly, but truly a Christian. But it was in the background of my childhood, and then I was taken by a friend to a church youth group looking for boys, frankly, and for more sugar than I was allowed at home. I do feel like most of the youth group evangelism is achieved through sugar and hormones in a way that I'm like, who's done the ethical reflection on that in youth leader training? And was taken to a big Christian festival, since disgraced, as many of these things get tinged, but had a very, very, something happened, had a powerful encounter, was knocked off my feet. My friends who take a lot of psychedelics say it sounds like not unlike the things that they experience on psychedelics. Profoundly transformative encounter with the love of God. And then I had 10 years of being a very happy, clappy Christian. I look back on that phase with a lot of affection. I found a lot of community. I found a lot of goodness. I found a lot of freedom. I found a lot of health, actually, in churches. And then I went to work for the BBC and started working on a TV program about the Bible and actually read it for the first time. Like, oh, hello. This is not just the 9 nice verses about there's a plan for my life. This is something else. This is something wild and spiky and complex and maybe dark, actually, and maybe harmful, and had a very bleak period of everything falling apart under my feet. Tried to be an atheist for a while, could not pull that off, could not shake God off, and have slowly found my way back into sort of not resignedly, but sort of surrendering to the fact that I can't get out from under the love of God, and I don't really want to. I'm still very compelled by the person of Jesus, but still feel comfortable on the edges. Still feel most comfortable in liminal spaces. I'm really sorry, Christians in the room, but don't find talking to big groups of Christians that interesting. I'm much more brought alive in places of existential honesty and human encounter where people are not certain or policing other people's certainty. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Pass it back along.
It's like telephone here. No, thanks. That's really good background. I mean, some of you guys have already addressed this a little bit, but let's just start with your upbringing. Like, what kind of household did you grow up in? Was it particularly religious, and would you say that you yourself were accepting of that religion, or was there always a tension from the beginning?
My upbringing was very devout. It was a very devout home, and some of that was really wonderful. Actually, in my family, there was a lot of emphasis on things like feed other people before you feed yourself, and there was a big obligation on, it is your duty to go and visit the sick, and so that part was, I really valued that. If there was someone sick on the street or nearby, my mum would always drop off food, and that was something that we had to do when we were kids. That was like a classic child Saturday afternoon job. I have lots of younger siblings, so now I'll make them do it, which is great. But it's, that kind of taking care of people. And our home was actually like a homeless shelter for other people who were struggling. So the irony was that, that there was this huge generosity, but also, you know, it was a very strict upbringing. So I didn't have like a television or radio or music. I'm still kind of learning about music now, which is very strange. And I don't know TV shows. So if you speak to me later and I don't know popular culture, it's because I grew up basically like in a cupboard, not really. And just to be clear, that was a joke. But you know, not sort of participating in the wider kind of cultural elements. I did wear a face veil for a lot of my life, and I wore a headscarf for a lot of my life. And actually, so I left Islam when I was 19, and it took me until I was 30 to actually visit my family without my headscarf, so I would just like wear it everywhere else. So it was this duality of like very, very generous and accepting of other people, but definitely for the people who are family, this expectation of being religious. And I think that this is the thing, if you take that faith seriously and you really believe your children will go to hell and suffer for all eternity, that is the kind of thing to do, I think, to make sure that their soul is safe as opposed to their kind of moment-to-moment life. As to whether I related to it or not, there are parts of it that I did. I really liked more of the Sufi tradition, this kind of just chanted and feeling connected to something. And unlike, I think, a lot of people I meet, I really love the structure of like, you pray 5 times a day, you know, you fast. I'm a naturally lazy person. I'm not going to do any of that unless it's like built in, and that has been really good. But I will say that there has always been doubt. So I don't think I've ever was able to believe fully. So even when I was praying and when I did fear hell, I always had questions both about God, just the idea of God, and then about specifically the specific religion of Islam. Yeah, so I think, yeah.
That's excellent. I grew up in a fairly rural community. My dad is a doctor, and so we were kind of the affluent kids on the block in a very rural town. When I had my come to Jesus moment at 13, I consistently found myself being the most, you know, passionate, exuberant Christian in most rooms that I walked into. I think to differentiate myself from most of my atheist colleagues, I would say that I never had the experience of having religion shoved down my throat, right? Like I never had a domineering youth pastor or bishop or evangelist who was telling me how to do Christianity. I think because of the context that I was raised in, I knew that, you know, my pastor didn't have a college education. Most of the Christians around me didn't have a college education. And I realized if I'm going to do this thing, I have to figure out how to do it on my own. So that was kind of where I was raised. And so, you know, there was what would you call it, autodidactic element of my faith. And then there was a deeply personal, deeply euphoric, experiential element, right? Cultivating a relationship with the Holy Spirit was my everything. I would wake up at 5 a.m. every morning before high school, and I would dance and pray for an hour before classes started. And then I'd go to school, and then I'd preach sermons and, you know, wag my finger at, you know, kids for doing naughty deeds, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, I grew up in a tiny house with 8 people in it, because Mormons like big families. I'm one of 6. My auntie had 12. There's just a lot of us running around, and I was the youngest. And my family fractured religiously from quite an early age. So my dad, when I was 6, left the Mormon faith and left the home. My brothers, as they grew up, they decided it wasn't for them. And rather than let that shake my faith, I think it allowed me to really double down. I lose count of the amount of times I tried to reconvert my father, the amount of times I sent Mormon missionaries to his new home, unsolicited. And the amount of times I really grabbed onto, there's a story from the Book of Mormon about a guy called Nephi and his 2 older brothers. And his 2 older brothers are not faithful, and they're not doing what they ought to be doing, and they're doubting the Lord. So Nephi, their younger brother, tells them off, and he's really cool about it. And he's like the hero of the story because he gets his unfaithful brothers to, do what they're meant to be doing. I really, really held on to that story and looked at my older brothers in that same way. And so I think my upbringing was one of, in some ways, isolation from others that was created by myself through my zealotry, through my real commitment to this faith. But in other ways, it was a desperate desire to have a positive impact on others, to really share what I thought was positive about my faith and what I thought it could bring to people's lives. And I really, really committed. I was a Mormon missionary. I then got married at a very early age. And, I went through all the steps of what, if anyone knows about the Mormon faith, you would do. So it was a very typical upbringing in that sense. I think if you speak to most members of the church, that would kind of typify their experience, is this feeling like an island, feeling like you have something that no one else has, and then you need to share it. So that was kind of my growing up Mormon.
Thank you. I feel like I said some already, but maybe I'll just add, I think for me, so I had, my parents still live where I grew up, which is a little village on the outskirts of Basingstoke, which is like one of the most boring kind of towns in a fairly boring county in southern England. And I just feel like my entire childhood was middle everything. Middle, and in a way that I'm very grateful for, right? Like, it was safe, my parents were loving, but we were just middle everything, middle class, middle of the road. And I had a friend come visit me and in my parents' family home, and he said, "Oh, you grew up in Privet Drive." And that really sums it up. Like, small, suburban-ish, just like real value on middleness, as far as I can tell. And I was this kid who was like hungry for adventure and transcendence. And I read all these novels and I wanted to be Gaelic or something else, right? I didn't want to come from this vanilla place. And so for me, my encounter with Christianity was about that, was like a seeking of ecstatic, transcendent meaningfulness in a life that was very safe and stable, and therefore I was bored out of my brain. Sorry, it's a bit of psychological. Shared too much.
So, for all of you, what were sort of the first signs of disruption for your faith? Was there a moment that sort of started turning everything? And I guess, how did you respond to those disruptions? Anybody can start.
I guess I'm starting again. There wasn't one moment, so there were a few moments that stand out, but what I will say is, I think I always found it hard to believe in the goodness of God, always. And like I said, I've always had this feeling of existential dysphoria. Like, I thought that being alive was the most insane thing for sentient people. So I actually I should have died at birth, basically, and I always was like, why did they save me? Clearly, I can't handle this. And I look around at everyone, and I'm like, why do they keep saying this life thing is good? And where is this good gone? And as I said, I did a lot of work with people who have suffered really the most intense horror. And that's something I still can't reconcile. So I kind of had that doubt about kind of God in general, and, this thing about when you're praying, who are you praying to? And why do people think it's like a personal relationship? Why does the universe kind of, why is it not just indifferent? Why do people think that there's this care that a God has to people? So that was kind of always there, but then I had more specific and I guess dramatic moments of doubt about the specific faith when I read the Quran, like in English for the first time, and then when because most people who grew up in the UK who don't speak Arabic read the Quran in Arabic, but they don't understand it. So I would pray 5 times a day in a language I don't know, and I would read, a holy text in a language I don't understand. And when I was trying to really find out what is it that I'm doing here, who am I praying to, I started reading the Quran in English. And I think I became an unbeliever like halfway through my first read of the Quran. But I still try to see, what do people in the faith say in response to these things? So I spent about 7 years kind of taking their counterpoints really seriously. And then one day I realized I just don't believe it. I had read this, it's a really strange thing that's got nothing to do with religion, but I read this book called Wild Swans. I don't know if you guys know it. And it's a story just about these three generations of women who grew up in China under like various regimes. And something about that book just made me realize that I was living in some kind of totalitarian system in my own brain. I don't know what it was about that book, but after I read that, I was like, yeah, I'm lying to myself. I actually just really don't believe this, and now I'm going to have to figure out what to do with that because I'm from a very religious world.
So I often tell people that I started losing my faith the moment that I gained it. I started deconverting the day that I converted. For me, Christianity was an existential lifeline from nihilism. My come to Jesus moment was Christmas of 2007, and I got hit, like square in the face with my first existential crisis, hyperventilating, crying, the whole 9 yards, and I needed Christianity to be true. I needed there to be a God to rescue me from this horror. So coming to faith for several years was trying to gain a sense of cosmic foothold, a sense of epistemic certainty. So, for me, that was a two-pronged approach, right? It was studying apologetics, studying the historicity of the Gospels and these types of things in order to say, hey, I have a logically valid reason to pursue this and to believe that life is not meaningless. And then on the other hand, it was, exploring the spiritual and cultivating a personal relationship with the Holy Spirit, an experiential Christianity. And I think that we don't know ourselves very well. And I think that, belief is not often derived from syllogisms, right? I was in a cult in the Netherlands for a little while, and which cult? It was a small Pentecostal cult. It doesn't really have a name, but it was an offshoot of Fire School of Ministry, where I did my pseudo-seminary days. And I wanted to die when I was there. And I don't know what the correlation between that sense and feeling like maybe this isn't true. I'm still unpacking that, 10 years later. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that's there, but it is.
I don't know how to adequately describe to you all just how all in I was. Just how much I believed it. How much I believed in a personal God who loved me, who cared about me, who knew my name, who wanted the best for me. How the ministering angels in my life sent to me through him were the people around me. How this was all part of a system designed for my welfare and the welfare of others. My devotion to the institution that represented that God was complete and solid. And I trusted them. I trusted the Mormon Church deeply. And for me, it was a moment of betrayal. It was a moment of discovering that I'd been lied to by that institution. That didn't shake my faith, but it shook my trust. There's a saying in ex-Mormonism that you go through what's called a faith crisis, right? So you have this moment of realizing maybe it's not true, maybe it's not what I thought it was. I push back on that term often because I think for many people, it doesn't start there. It starts with trust. You discover that the church that you paid 10% of your income to, believing that it was helping the poor and needy, has actually amassed $100 billion in a hedge fund and has not been giving that money to charity. They've been passing the plate and pocketing it. And when you realize that, you think, okay, well, what else have they not been honest about? And you start to look, and you give yourself permission to look beyond the narrative that they gave you about their history, about how it started. So you discover that they weren't honest with you about the practice of polygamy for a long time. They weren't honest with you about all these things that you thought were anti-Mormon lies. You were told they were lies fed to you by people who were angry at the church who wanted it to fall apart. And all of a sudden, they're real. And worse than that, the church has released a series of essays on their website that you didn't know about, admitting that these things are real, because finally the information age has caught up to them. And you think, what is this thing? I still have faith in a God that loves me, but maybe he's not here. Maybe he's somewhere else. And now I need to go find him. And that's hard, and that's difficult. But also you've spent your entire life as part of this tribe, as part of this group of people that, as I described before, feel like an island. You feel distinct, you feel different, you feel special, chosen, whatever the words might be. They're still your people. You still have this distinct cultural heritage with this other group of people. You have practices, you have beliefs that all bind you together. You don't want to abandon those people. You don't want to leave. And so for me, what happened was I no longer trusted this church to be honest with me, but I was sure as anything going to be honest with my people, with my tribe, with the people around me. I was going to talk honestly about this stuff if no one else was. And so that was my moment of, okay, let's have honest conversations then. And I started to find an online space where that was happening and cultivated my own part of that with an accent that makes Americans go crazy and think that you know way more than you do. And so, really pressed that advantage. And yeah, that's how it all started for me.
Thank you. I just want to name two things, and one is what a profound privilege it is to, it's making me a bit teary, to be at this level of honesty and vulnerability. And also that if it's your first ever estuary event, you might be like, what on earth? It's 10 o'clock on what day is it? On Saturday morning, and we're in existential terror. Where am I? Yeah, it's beautiful. So I don't, I got disrupted in and then disrupted out. But I wonder, what's coming to mind is I actually want to talk about why the in and out thing even begins to fall apart. All the language falls apart, right, once you interrogate it. But why I still, the image that was coming to mind for me when a lot of you were talking about loss of faith was remembering that sense of vertigo, of like, oh gosh, the foundations are failing me. I have built my life on something that is not structurally sound, and that it's like one of the worst feelings you can go through in your life. Identity, belonging. But that my experience actually was like I started on the top floor of a house and then I'd fall down and then that floor would fail, right? And then that floor would fail. But that I eventually hit some foundations that didn't fail. And that was the love of God. And we could spend a whole day talking about at least that first and last word in that sentence. And I remember like moments where I was really trying hard to be like, okay, there is no meaning, there is no God, like this is all just a cope, we're just gonna, and if I'm gonna be honest, if I'm gonna have inner peace, I'm gonna have to let go of all these things that I want to be true and are not true. And then a voice speaking back to me, being like, it's all right, like, I'll be here. I'm here. Go do your thing. No, not panicked, like not angry. Yeah, and realizing that foundation, like the rage and the pain and the fear and the questions, there was a strong enough container for those. And it didn't involve like exile into the wilderness, but could be held. I think is what began my okay, I can find my way in a different but related direction.
Okay, great. Well, now I want to kind of explore a little bit of how these disruptions factor into what you do professionally? So, Sierra, why don't you start?
I always have the least time to think on the spot. No, it's fine. Oh, there you go.
Sure. Right, off you go.
Yeah, I was like, the three of us probably have easier. Hugely. So I worked at the BBC for a long time, and then got frustrated, having been through this like dark night of the soul, whatever you want to call it, came out with this like deep hunger for honest conversations and to talk about meaning and to talk about what a good life is, not be afraid of this questioning impulse. And I was making radio programs at the BBC and thought that would be the best place to be, but actually there's so little tolerance, even in the really good places. Like I work on the Moral Maze, which is a Radio 4 program where there's like 45 minutes to talk about the big questions, but still you can't get ideas passed unless there's some bloody anniversary or there's something in the news. And I was like, unless you're Adam Curtis, making content that really deals with the big things, that's not constantly having to have a news hook, it's just not going to happen, and I'm not talented enough. And so I left and ended up running this think tank called Theos, which is a Christian-rooted religion and society think tank, trying to be a kind of generous, intellectually alert, thoughtful presence in some of these debates about what might religion have to offer in these times, which I loved doing. And I think what I would note, and now I wrote a book with Fully Alive, and I host a podcast where we have kind of conversations about people's journeys and their values and their philosophy of life as kind of honestly and humanly as possible. And what I've learned is, I think, wherever you start, philosophically and spiritually, unless it is rocked, right, unless it is torn down or challenged, and maybe you kind of re-find your way back for yourself, or maybe you don't, but the people who've not done it, I prefer people who have done it, right? There's like there's a depth and a steadiness and a level of richness, I think, in conversations with people who have allowed their sense of self or philosophy of life or religion to really be significantly tested or to fully fall apart. And that's why these kind of spaces are so great, because it attracts people. But what I'm trying to do in public is to just normalize that the questions and the longings are normal, and not being certain about it and needing to tidy it up with a neat tribal bow and be like, my gang have the answers, is also normal.
Thanks. I was prepped for this from the time I could speak, I think. I was that child who asked why too many times, just too many. And I think that led into a discovery about the church that I belong to, and started with a series of Facebook posts asking why. Why this? Why that? Why? For example, I didn't know that black members of the church were not allowed salvation within Mormonism until 1978. Didn't know about that. Why? Is a big question there. It's a topic I've explored a lot since, and the roots of it are fascinating and horrifying in equal measure. But I think how this led to what I did professionally, like I said, I needed to be honest with my community. I needed to be honest with myself. And I was, in some ways, still accepted. There's a certain level of, in a patriarchal society like Mormonism, being male means people listen to you. And I was still being listened to, even as I was essentially just a gadfly, just constantly pecking and going, well, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we talking about that? I was at a congregation in Oxford, which also helped. My ecclesiastical leader was a philosophy fellow at Corpus Christi, and so he and I could sit and have the sort of conversations that you don't normally get to have at church. So I was in a very theologically liberal space that allowed me to maintain my community while also being very irritating to the orthodox amongst us. And I was able to sit in that space for a long time. And so I felt comfortable doing so because it felt honest and it felt true, and I still had the underlying faith necessary to profess belief in Jesus and a God and all those sorts of things. So I could come at this from a place, honestly, where I still had religious faith, but I was now willing to talk about things that to many are no-go areas because they would undermine such faith. But during this sort of exploratory phase of asking those questions, my faith remained. And I knew two things. I knew that my faith wouldn't look the same as time went on. And it was a great lesson in the fact that life changes as you go through it. And I also knew that I was on a ticking clock as to how big my sphere of influence could get. When you start a YouTube channel challenging the Mormon Church, which loves to tightly control its own narrative, there is a ticking clock about how long it will be before someone taps you on the shoulder and says, maybe you ought to stop. So I lived with that like a Damoclean sword over my head for a long time. But it felt honest and the right thing to do. And I was fed up of dishonesty. So I had to take that under my own charge and choose to be honest.
So when I was a believer, I was quite evangelistic as a evangelical. And part of that for me was having a realization in high school where it's like, I'm not qualified to walk up to somebody and tell them, hey, this is what you ought to believe, if I'm not first willing to hear them out and hear what they believe. It feels like that is a properly basic matter of dignity that ought to be extended across the board. So I made it a point, like, no, I need to go and understand these people so that I can have a response to them. So I remember I was in Starbucks and a Muslim from Damascus walks in and he picks up my book and is like, have you guys ever heard this book of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek? So he picks it up and with a thick accent he goes, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. What an interesting title, my friend. And we sit down and he's in like this full white garb and we talked for like 3 hours. And it struck me, it's like, I want him to fall in love with Jesus. I didn't even know that Jesus was a prophet in Islam at the time. But it's like, I want to invite him to my church. I want him to believe what I believe. I want him to, see salvation. But it's like, well, I need to afford him that same courtesy of sharing what he believes. So I went with him to his mosque and was struck by the humanity of the whole thing, right? The beepers going off, in the back of the room and like, the 14-year-old slouching and scrolling on his phone. Like, seeing the humanity there meant a lot to me. And at the time, that was a means to an end. That was a means to, convert these people to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Fast forward a decade, and I think that same passion to understand people where they're at and on their own terms is something that's stuck with me, where I feel like if I have not sufficiently understood a group in such a way that I can state back to a person what they believe and have them affirm what I say, then I haven't understood them. And that's a consistent challenge to myself now.
Well, thank you, everyone, for giving me time to think about it. The reason I needed time to think is, there's like multiple layers to this. So when I was Muslim, I wouldn't say the religion kind of propelled my work, but I was involved in a lot of things like trying to help people who had been victims of religious abuse. So whether this was things like in Sharia courts or women trying to escape violent marriages who weren't given divorce rights, or just various things like that. And then when I left Islam, I had the option actually to, at the time I was part of this like big apostasy community, and many of those people I'm still friends with. And a lot of them did become what we used to call like professional ex-Muslims, where they would like make that a key part of their work in the world. And I didn't want to do that at the time, and I still don't. So that was never something I was interested in. But what I did do, because I'd already had the experience of doing it from within the faith, I did a lot of, sorry, excuse me, I did a lot of like free speech work for, like I did a lot of individual cases, just dealing with individual people who were struggling with something because of a religious persecution or something like that. So that I've been very committed to. And I mentioned before that I've always had this, I've always been just really deeply concerned, or concerned is not a strong enough word, horrified, as I said, by the level of like suffering in the world and just the worst things people do to each other. So I started a career in human rights law, and I quickly realized that I am not the person who can do this job, because I can't separate myself from clients. You know, there were colleagues of mine who could compartmentalize, and I couldn't, and I didn't feel strong enough to cope with their pain. So I kind of left that profession, and I went and did like a very just standard kind of corporate, profession for a while, for a long time actually. And that's where I thought I was going to stay. And then I had this very strange experience in St. Peter's Basilica that I mentioned. And then I don't know why, but when I came back, I was like, well, I can't keep doing the corporate thing anymore. I'm just wasting my life. And even though it didn't, to be clear, it didn't feel like a waste at the time, because I have a large family and I support them, so I think that is valuable. But I didn't quite know what to do with that. And the experience I had in St. Peter's Basilica was directly tied to this like attunement I've always had to suffering. But the difference is, when I had this experience there, I suddenly felt flooded with so much love that I felt like I could bear all of the suffering of the world, that I was actually strong enough to do it. And I felt it for such a brief period of time, that as soon as it was over, I started bargaining with myself. I was like, no, I don't mean that. I don't want to bear the suffering of everyone, actually. But I did feel that I was changed somehow. So I knew I couldn't kind of look away from all of this ugliness that had always bothered me. But I didn't know what to do about it. And then last year, I was baptized. And when you're baptized, they tell you, God has chosen you by name. And that's actually very annoying, because then I had to figure out, well, what am I being called by name to do? So I would say that it's changed my profession, but I wouldn't be able to say right now in what way. I know that I want to reconnect back to helping people in the worst of circumstances. I don't know how, but I still don't want to make a career necessarily out of like converting people out of a religion, or kind of doing critiques of religion. I want to do just the sort of like practical legal work of protecting people's individual rights when they find themselves in that situation. But then beyond that, in some other way, I mean, this is an insane thing to say, I think, for anyone to be able to do, but to find some way to become a light to the world, as they say. And I have no idea how to do that. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. I'm trying to figure it out.
All right, thank you for that. I'm just, so moved by all your stories. Sorry, I'm emotional. I shouldn't be moderating this. I'm too emotional for this. Okay, so I want to move on to a couple specific questions, and then I'll open it up to some questions between you guys. And I want to start with Sahira and Nemo. You've both been excommunicated. What is that like? What was the experience of that you did not expect that came out of that?
Very hard to describe. It's really hard to put into words, except obviously it's very hard. It's very hard to know that you lose everyone you love. And I think what's really hard is it's not that I could only feel my pain, I could feel theirs. And I think, and this is something I've always been, in this apostasy group, I was always unusual in this sense, because I felt a lot of compassion for people who, like I said, if you genuinely believe, if you really believe that your soul is the most important thing, and that out of love, people who love you want to protect your soul from eternal torment, then the loving thing to do is to get your soul in order. I compare it to, I'm not saying it's in reality the same situation, but it's the same idea as, say, somebody who has a child who identifies as another sex or gender, and that child is going to go through surgery that the parent believes will permanently ruin their life. I've heard parents say this, that the loving thing to do for my child in that moment is to protect the integrity of their body, even if they hate me in that moment. So that was really painful. But the unexpected thing has been that it was not permanent in all cases. It was for some people. I would say it's been about 50-50. I've actually been surprised by how many relationships that over the years, after a very long rupture, I have been able to maintain again. And I was always very committed to doing that. And I'm very grateful that I still have around half of the people still in my life and who are very supportive of me. And for that, I am deeply grateful. And the other thing I'm grateful for is how many kind of like, chosen families I've made. I did kind of join and help set up an apostasy community, and I've met just, when the whole world crumbles beneath your feet and you feel like you can't trust anyone because even the people who are supposed to love you the most turn away from you, it's really hard to be able to trust people. But actually, I have met a lot of people who, when I have surgery, I have friends who I can call who I think I have in some ways much more trust than in some of my family because they have been there for me more than family. So that's been really wonderful. And in a weird way, I kind of went through this process early on in my life. And so now I'm watching people kind of go through similar things in the political world, where people have been kind of found themselves kind of cancelled or excommunicated because of their political views. And I suddenly find myself in a position to actually be able to offer help to them because I know what that's like. So, and this is part of what I've been doing because I've done this before, is help build communities for those people so that they can find other people. So I've suddenly become very skilled at just building a support network from scratch, and even if you think that, you're running from death threats. So, in a weird way, if I kind of take a long view, I have actually been surprised by how useful actually I've been able to turn all these experiences into, though I regret that they have happened. And yeah, I've met people who I don't think I would have met in any other way. So I didn't expect to feel in the end so much gratitude for that.
Okay. You'll allow me to deflect from my own emotions through witty anecdotes for a moment. We might be able to get serious. I was excommunicated 2 years ago, almost, it'd be 2 years ago in a couple of months. And like I said, it hung over me for a while. I have watched and known people to be excommunicated over the years. So when you start into this sort of space of post-Mormon commentary or progressive Mormon commentary, you look back at the big names, people like Fawn Brody, who wrote the first unauthorized biography of the prophet Joseph Smith. She was excommunicated for it. You have people like the September 6, a group of 6 scholars and academics at church universities and other places who were excommunicated for writing articles that the church did not care for. You have Sam Bishop, who was excommunicated for advocating for the rights of children to not be asked sexual questions by an ecclesiastical leader in a closed room. The church instituted the changes he asked for, but they excommunicated him afterwards. And so I understood that if I wanted to make a real difference, the price of that would probably be my membership within the community. The straw that broke the camel's back for the church, I think, was a couple of things, maybe 3 things. It's one of these 3 things, who knows what it is. It's me flying to Texas and back in 72 hours to stand for 3 minutes in front of a town council and say the church is lying to you about how big this temple needs to be that they're trying to shove down your throat through lawsuit. And I do not care for my church lying to you people. So there I said, I'm a member of this church and they're not being honest with you. And I don't care for it. So it could be that. It could be the interview I did where I was asked a series of questions about Mormonism. I was given a box full of questions, sat in a room for an hour, and asked to answer them as honestly as possible as a member of the church. And I did, and I think I was far too honest in ways that the church didn't care for. Or it is the advocacy I did within the church that I then spoke about publicly that led to the background checking of people that work with children within the church in the UK, which is now a thing that happens. I was part of a team of people on the inside of the church who pressed the right buttons, spoke to the right people, nudged the right things, and managed to make that happen. The prize for any of those things is excommunication. And so I was sent a letter inviting me to a church disciplinary council that I was told it was optional to attend. They would make a decision either way. But if I wanted to be there and say my piece, then I was welcome to attend. And I went with my wife. I went wearing my white temple suit. So in Mormonism, as you worship in the temple, the highest sort of levels of worship within the Mormon faith are reserved for the temple. And you wear all white in there to signify innocence and purity. And I thought, well, then I don't think I've done anything wrong. I maintain my innocence in all this, so I shall wear my white temple clothes to this meeting. So I went, I sat in a room with my sort of diocese level ecclesiastical leader and with my wife and with a member of my congregation who was allowed to be there to support me. And witnesses were brought in and out that I called who wanted to speak to why what I was doing wasn't wrong. Evidence was read out against me as to why the church felt like I should be excommunicated, what constituted my apostasy. And I read them 8,000 words of defense in response. 2 allegations that I only heard once I was in the room, but I had a fairly clear idea of what it might be that they were upset about. And to describe the experience of sitting in that room with men professing to love you while they threaten your eternal salvation, I think is best summed up by Margaret Toscano, who was one of the academics of the September 6 group that were excommunicated. And this is quite strong language. She said it was like being raped by Care Bears. Yeah. Smiles on their face, professions of their love for you and their care for you, and them wanting the best in the world for you. And that is why they're going to separate you from your community. That is why they're going to look at my wife in that room and say, you know, that eternal marriage you have in the Mormon temple, that thing that binds you together for eternity, gone. Because when you're excommunicated from the Mormon church, all of your blessings, all of your ordinances, all of your covenants, all the things that you've done to get to the point you're at within the church, taken away, gone, disappeared. Like they never happened. I would no longer be with my parents in the next life. I would no longer be with my wife in the next life. And more than that, my standing within the community that I love in this life would be irreparably damaged. I wouldn't be able to speak publicly. I wouldn't be able to pray. I wouldn't be able to teach a lesson. I wouldn't be able to contribute. I could be in the building, but I'm not allowed to participate. I'm not allowed to wear sacred Mormon temple garments. Had to get rid of all of those, which act as underwear in Mormonism. So I had to go and look for underwear at the age of 26 for the first time in a long time. And just everything about my world changed overnight. And I knew in the room that a decision had been made, because I knew when I went in, the decision had already been made. It was a kangaroo court. They wanted me gone. Someone in Salt Lake, the prophet of the Mormon church now, is someone that I've had personal interaction with through this journey, which is a story too long to get into here. But he was upset by the conversations that he and I had. He has the power to press upon my local leadership and say, this guy has to go. And I think that's what happened. So I walked out to a group of people who stood out there in the night with banners in my support and candles, and was embraced by a community that I had built around this idea that there is another way to be a member of the church. You don't just have to ignore the problems. You can talk about them. You can be honest. You can be open. And that was it. A few days later, I got a letter saying, yep, you've been excommunicated for apostasy. You're no longer allowed to do X, Y, Z. These things have been cancelled and whatnot. I appealed it. I got a response from the prophet of the Mormon church saying, no, we agree. You are excommunicated. You are an apostate. And that has been my life for the past few years. And we can get into what that looks like at some point. But yeah, that's what excommunication of the Mormon church looks like.
Okay, great. We're getting close to time, so I want to ask Jared and Elizabeth a question, then I'll open it to questions between the two of you. You both have conversations often with people who you, from all different backgrounds, you probably often disagree with. What is it like engaging with people who fully embrace the ideology you rejected?
Do you want to go first?
You can try. So I'm struggling with that question a bit because it feels like talking to anyone for me, right? I'm not starting with, I'm not putting in between us, these are the things we disagree on, or these are the ways we're different. I'm starting with, oh, who are you? What's your story? Like, what's your name? My husband talks about if you know someone's face and their name and their story, that's what you need to know someone. So I just want to look in someone's face. Emmanuel Levinas talks about the ethical call of the human face. That because of my faith, because I believe every human being is made in the image of God, that we are walking icons of the divine, that's not snuffed out by a particular set of intellectual premises, or that's irrelevant. Like, we can do a pretty good job of marring it, mainly in each other, but it's always there. So I think the thing that maybe what we have in common is we've built the tolerance for the natural thing that happens in your body when someone says something that you disagree with or expresses contempt for you or the things that are sacred to you. And so now it feels really natural and interesting, but it is, I talk and write a lot about these practices of like building the habits of curiosity and noticing defensiveness in yourself and noticing fight or flight, noticing the withdrawal that happens and learning to override it a bit, to move towards each other. I think when Jesus says, if someone strikes you in the face, turn the other cheek, you can read that as override your fight or flight. Right? When you feel that flinch from someone said something you disagree with, or they've made you feel unseen in some way, you can notice it and stay steady and like disrupt those dynamics somehow, and that's when all the interesting stuff happens. That's where I'm like, I'm going to learn something. We might really see each other. And Martin Buber talks about that space between us is the really real, like that is my jam. That is like the thing I crave. Moments of real human encounter of honesty and masklessness that are not premised on either real or pretended sameness. I love it.
I love talking to fundamentalists, and like real, hardline conservatives in various faith traditions. I had this encounter like a couple weeks ago. I swear I attract these people and they just find me. I was sitting on a park bench and an Australian man walks up to me in the middle of North Carolina and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you have a moment to talk about my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?" And first of all, why was he Australian? I need answers. I think that I find that I love talking to fundamentalists and having their cognitive dissonance highlighted. And I think that often my temperament and predisposition to be smiley and agreeable sometimes makes people uncomfortable in a really weird and unique way, especially in traditions that hyperemphasize the idea of, it's us versus the world. And, I've talked to some Jehovah's Witnesses and even some Latter-day Saints where you can feel like they're uneasy by the fact that I don't hate them, by the fact that I'm not against them, by the fact that like, yeah, man, like I'm so glad that you're in like a faith tradition that like, you feel at home in. I'm
Breaks down.
yeah, exactly. And it's so funny. And so, with this young Australian man who met me on a park bench, he was so put off by the fact that I was nice and smiley to him. He said, you need to repent of this and that, and you need to get on your knees and call upon the Lord Jesus Christ. And I was like, wow, thanks for telling me that, man. he was so indignant, he walked away and like refused to shake my hand. It was so comical to me. So there's cognitive dissonance on that side. And then I think sometimes for the people who love us most, it's really difficult to walk with them through that. My parents have been grieving my spiritual death for the past 8 years. And I know that to them, their little boy is going to hell. And it's such a bizarre position to be in, because I've had to sit down with my parents and, use their Bible to try to comfort them and give them some modicum of hope that, hey, all things work together for, those who are called according to, and quoting their own scriptures back to them just to hope that they have a sense of peace that this is going to be okay. And it's hard.
Great. Do you have any questions for each other? It's okay if not, but I wanted to give you space to. No? Almost too many. Well, we can have a debrief after, but let's close it down then. And I want to ask, what advice would you have for someone who's going through a situation where their faith is either being shaken or they're being, unraveled in some way? For those in the thick of it, what advice would you give them if you have any?
I got one. Slow down. Every crappy decision you have ever made will be expedited by the sense of urgency. Life is long, and you don't have to figure it out tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Well, a big part of my journey is that a year ago I nearly died because a blood clot went to my brain, and I rattle when I walk now. I got more pills than I care to mention that I take to keep me alive, but to that point, it pays to act as though life is long. But there is also something that I've learned in appreciating that it isn't guaranteed. And for many people, that brings panic and fear, and I get that. For me, it seems to have brought on a feeling of peace, that life is happening to me right now as it is happening. And the next moment may happen, it may not. And so I don't need to worry about that moment. I just need to think about the one that I'm in. And if that's really difficult, okay, how can I take a moment and alleviate that feeling? Or how can I just sit with it? If alleviating it's not possible or not wise or not the right thing to do. And practicing a form of acceptance for the new position you find yourself in. You will grieve the life that you had, but all of your life is the life that you had. Every moment passes away and then the next one arises until they stop arising. And that's kind of how I live now. And so I think, okay, there might be lessons, there might be things to learn from that past life. But I'm not even going to look to the future. I'm just going to look to right now. Who am I around? Who can I care for? Who can I love? Who can I be kind to? And that will include myself at times, and at other times, not. Yeah.
It's very hard to give general advice, so I'm going to split it into a few different situations. The first one is, so I have my experience, and then I, as I said, had been building this many apostasy groups for like many years. So the first thing I would say is figure out if you're in physical danger first. I work, one of my many side jobs is I do a lot of free speech cases, and my boss in that job did his PhD into ex-Muslims, and for example spoke to a woman who from a Muslim family who was a lesbian, and her parents locked her up in a room, and basically weren't going to let her come out until she renounced that. So in that situation, for people who may find themselves in that situation, it's figuring out who can you call in the middle of the night that's going to help you escape through a window, and everything else we can figure out later. Everything about who you're angry about and who did this to you, we can figure out afterwards. Just know how you are going to be safe. And there are organizations that help with that. This kind of group grew into what was called the Faith to Faithless organization, which they also work with like ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-evangelical Christians of that kind of very high control form. So the first thing is look after yourself physically. Then a lot of people who are coming out of that situation may need to then think about how to look after themselves financially and emotionally. They may not have learned. I had to figure out how to open a bank account, and I was like the first woman in my family to have like a job outside of the home, and just these practical yes, the bigger picture is important, but day to day you're going to need to figure out how to live, and you need to figure that out, because when you are in this situation you are so vulnerable. And the thing that I have seen time and time again is people jump out of the frying pan and into the fire, or is it the other way around, whichever way around that goes. They leave a high control religion, and they get into a relationship with a guy, because that guy offers them safety and security and offers to fix all of their problems for them. And 3-4 years down the line, they are in another dangerous situation. So pause and figure out what your actual needs are and who can support you in those. People are not necessarily, it depends on where you are in the world, but in some parts of the world, you don't have to be alone in that. So that's number one. Number two is, on the slow down thing, I think, yes, life is kind of both long and short, but you do, so there's a lot of people I saw in the ex-Muslim group who kind of left, as I said, one religion and then kind of went full scale into another really, really quickly. So it was like, okay, I'm going to reject these sexual boundaries that I had, and now I'm going to go the complete opposite direction and be polyamorous and take lots of drugs and for some people that might be a healthy life, but for a lot of people it was like this immediate reaction, and they actually ended up very, very damaged in other ways. So I think take your time to figure out what is it that you actually want your life to look like. You may have an experience of kind of rejecting something, but you need time to figure out what is the thing that you actually want to build, and find out who you trust in that. So that's people coming out of kind of like a kind of more dangerous situation. On the other side, I don't think I have advice of what on earth you do when you suddenly encounter something that you think is the love of God, but I've taken my own advice. I've taken it very slow. I did get baptized, but I spoke to the priest about it beforehand, and I did say it's basically experimental, and if I think I'm joining a cult, someone's going to pull me out of this. I haven't figured out exactly what I think about. I have no idea what I think about the theology, but I don't want to think about that right now. I just want to know that I'm not kind of signing up again all of my thinking to something else. And I'm seeing where it takes me. And at the moment, I guess the advice I would say is enjoy that, because I'm enjoying that right now. It's been wonderful, this part. And sorry, I know we have to wrap up, but the other thing I would say for people who are going through a disruption that is on the more negative side, it is not forever. Well, it may not be forever. It may be forever for some people, and I think for those people, we need to help. But again, the benefit of having seen apostasy communities over a longer period is seeing just how many people thought that they would never be in touch with their parents again, and actually 5 or 6 years down the line have rebuilt some kind of relationship. And not everybody wants that, not everyone can have that, but just the kind of immediate situation you may not be in forever. And yeah, I'll stop there. Oh, sorry.
I actually think that was amazing. I don't have anything useful to add.
Okay, well, thanks so much, everybody. Give a hand for these lovely panelists.